For easy-to-click links, you're invited to go to markdillon.com/83. That will bring you directly to this episode's blog post. Today's interview is with Kathy Hester. She is the blogger at healthyslowcooking.com. She's also written a number of great vegan plant-based cookbooks, and she began her journey in the 1980s eating plant-based.
Back in the days when you couldn't get tofu at the grocery store and no one had an idea of what tempeh was. And browned rice was pretty weird too. You had to go into the special health food stores that were in somebody's house. So it felt all underground.
It's not uncommon in a conversation with somebody that's been eating plant-based for a number of years that this topic comes up time and time again, that back in the day, it kind of felt underground, and I recall those feelings. I mean, going into these hole-in-the-wall places, it almost felt like you were doing something wrong or something possibly illegal. Well, of course, nowadays we know that this was a great journey that we were on, but back then, eating plant-based was really unusual. Today, if you live in a major metropolitan area, there's a really great chance that within a short distance you can get a grocery store that has tons of produce and tons of plant-based and vegan items. But that's not true of everywhere. There are many communities that still have that small 1960s, 1970s grocery stores, that feeling that you're stepping back in time. And the amount of resources that they have is pretty limited. Some rice, some vegetables, some pasta, but you can still get plant-based items. It's just not as convenient. Occasionally, we get a moment of clarity, a moment of mindfulness, and we realize that what we're eating isn't just food. It's so much deeper than that.
I saw a side of beef on a hook in a grocery store, and right at that moment, I realized the things that were on styrofoam wrapped up neatly in plastic were really cows. It just kind of all clicked in because you really didn't notice that sort of thing as much in the 80s in the supermarkets. They were trying to keep you from it, whereas now I think they're trying to let people know a little bit more about it. And I would say even then, from then in the summers, I would usually eat vegan. And the more you know, the more choices you have to make. So with knowing more about the dairy industry, and especially for me, because I am an ethical vegan, which just means I feel sad for the animals and that's why I don't eat them. I don't have any judgments that other people should feel exactly the way I feel. But the more I knew, the more I was like, oh, I just can't do it, because it's very easy for even meat eaters to say, veal, that's a pretty uncomfortable subject for most people. But then once you connect that to, there's so many baby cows for veal because of the milk industry. And that was pretty much what got me to go ahead and go plant-based.
Back in the 80s, when it was this underground feeling, and I felt that as well in the 90s, what drove you to, you have that awareness, you know that, okay, here's the connection. It's not just food inside a styrofoam wrapping. It's a cow. And yet that was unusual back then. So what allowed you to just make that shift? I think a lot of people had that awareness, but they didn't make that shift. How is it that you decided, I'm going to make this change?
I definitely have a very driven personality, and I'm slightly obsessive. So if I get an idea in my head, I pretty much just follow it to the end. My first career, I was a professional musician. And so if you look at it that way, if you're going to be one of under 100 French horn players, working, you've got to kind of have this almost all or nothing mentality and not let things stop you once you make those sorts of choices. So it really was, I saw a side of beef. I said to myself, I'm never eating meat again. And then I didn't. So I know for some people, it's much harder and they have to transition much slower. And I will say my transition from vegetarian to vegan was definitely much slower than that. It took me a lot longer to go ahead and switch over. Also, I was at an arts college, so there was always a vegetarian option, and that did help. And that was very unusual in the 80s. And in fact, it could be quite hard to find vegetarian entrees when you went to restaurants. And now that's almost unheard of. You can go to a steakhouse and they will have something vegetarian that you can eat. And I still think in some ways it's easier to eat out as a vegan now than it was to eat out as a vegetarian in the 80s.
And you also said that you don't feel that others should feel the way that you feel. And I think that a lot of people who start eating plant-based, they kind of awaken to this and go, wow, this is really great. And here's why I'm doing it. And then they want to share it with others and they want to almost convince others to do this. So can you talk about how you're able to just let go of that and say, yeah, you can feel this way and this is how I feel about it?
Yeah, and there are a couple of ways that I can explain it. One is that I am Southern, born and grew up in North Carolina, and there's a non-vegan saying, you catch more flies with honey. Of course, we're using agave nectar now, and I think that's part of it. I think that I want more people to at least eat more plant-based meals. I'm happy if someone is trying Meatless Monday. I want to be there as a resource for them to help them because I know in my mind that my real goal is, yes, I want you to eat better. I want you to have more options and see that this isn't a difficult lifestyle. So by me supporting them and trying it, I think that gives them a much better feel for it. They feel less intimidated, less like someone's judging them, and in the end, honestly, more likely they're going to come to me and possibly eat less meat because they felt that kind of comforting environment.
I like this because of that non-judgment. People don't feel that pressure. They don't feel that anger that sometimes comes across from others.
I call them the mean vegans. They're a group of people, and as a joke, I often say there's really only 4 mean vegans in the world. They just schedule things so at least one of them is online at all times so they can say something nasty. Because, if someone comes to my site and says, hey, can I use milk in that recipe? If I go off and tell them why they shouldn't have milk and how horrible milk is that going to make them make it with soy milk? Of course not. For you and I, if someone, and we've had this happen as much as there's mean vegans, there's mean meat eaters too, who are going to come up and say, you should do this and this is why, and you're wrong. And what does that make you feel like? I know for me, it makes me want to fight back. And even I've never gone back on thinking I should eat meat, but even if it was a tiny sparkle in my head, someone coming at me in that argumentative manner is going to make me never listen to them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to listen to them because I think they're irrational. I think that they're trying to make me do something. And I think that just as human beings, when someone's trying to make you do something, it basically encourages you to do the opposite.
Oftentimes I've noticed that interaction that goes on, and I try to just share with people who are eating this way, that are interested in eating plant-based. Think about that person, you're going at them and you're trying to convince them. Well, if they came at you and tried to convince you to eat meat, would you change your mind? And it's like, well, if you wouldn't change your mind, why do you think that they would change their mind? It's a fascinating thing, and it's a I see the struggle and I've seen it in myself over the years, but there's so much more joy when you can just kind of let that go, so to speak.
Well, and I think it actually opens up the community more when it seems like vegan is, and vegan has gotten a bad connotation just with the general population because of the fact that they feel like at some point someone has been indoctrinated and is really trying to almost talk them into coming to the other side. It's almost like people feel like it's some sort of charismatic religion, and that, oftentimes people will knock on your door and they will want you to change your religion. So I think some people feel like, well, that's what these vegan people I know are doing. Whereas I think just being open about what you do and how people can do things a little bit differently, and really be there and field questions. I think that that's so much more important. Like, and there are times if someone asks me something like, why don't you do dairy? And I'll say, are you sure you really want to know? Because I will tell you, I don't think that the world is going to stop eating meat overnight. I think it's going to be a long process if it ever happens. But I think we have to be real open and let people be where they are. I mean, for instance, I eat too much sugar. I'll just let you know that. So I'm always, and I make recipes with stevia and with all different kinds of sweeteners. But for me, that's always a constant thing that's really hard for me to give all the way up. And I can imagine that someone out there feels similarly about meat. So if I'm not there to help them along their journey to find new ways to be able to let go of that, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the animals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that that's really the best thing we can do is just simply leading by example and then being very open to helping when asked.
Right. And one thing I will do that's as mean vegan as I get, like if I hear through the grapevine, some of my friends are like, oh, I don't know if I want to go to dinner, or I don't know if I want a vegan dinner over there. Then the last time this happened, I invited people over for a multi-course tasting menu based on watermelon and avocado, complete with cocktails and infusions and blah, blah. So if ever I hear someone kind of deciding they're pulling to this negative place, that's not true. I'm going to do everything I can to kind of put them back in the center again. Who's going to be mad that they ate smoked avocado mousse? Nobody.
Right.
In their right mind, So I've used this example before, is that I say I want to be that person's, like the vegan next door. You can come over, you can have coffee, you can borrow some vegan creamer or agave nectar from me, but I'm not going to come over to your house and start cleaning out your cabinets.
That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about, oftentimes it feels like when we're eating plant-based and we're eating vegan food, that we do other things as well that kind of support that in a way. And things like walking, like yoga, like Tai Chi, like, growing our own food. And so I'm wondering for you, is there anything else that complements the way that you eat and supports the way that you eat?
Well, honestly, I think because I do not do a lot of animal rights things. And that is not because I don't believe in animal rights. It is because I'm too tender-hearted to be involved. So I'm much more likely to give money to rescue groups and things like that than to actually be a rescuer myself, because I don't have the strength to do that. It's not what I was kind of meant to do. But I do think that, even if you take it down to a pet level, I think if you connect that your pets are animals, I have 2 rescue dogs and 2 rescue cats, and seeing them every day and how they're little thoughtful beings that often make bad decisions or good decisions, so they have some sort of consciousness in there. I think that makes it that's always made it really easy for me to go, well, I don't want to eat meat because I love my animals.
Mm.
And so I think, and I agree with you too. I think when I do talks and I'm talking, usually when I'm teaching cooking classes and things like that, almost always over half of the class are currently eating meat, and maybe if I'm lucky, a quarter of the class is vegan. So usually I'm dealing with people who are eating meat, who are wanting to make this transition. And what I say to them, and I think this is where vegan and plant-based can be very helpful as terminology, is that if you're trying to not eat animals because you love them, then you have to remember that, and you have to think about that every day until it just kind of becomes natural to you. Same thing if you're being plant-based. Most people use the terminology plant-based to mean a healthy way of vegan eating, because eating vegan, Oreos are vegan and a whole bunch of other things
Mm.
that are considered bad foods, and I have some different opinions about that too. But so plant-based people are often some people doing like McDougall or some of those different diets, Engine 2. And some of those people actually have very serious health ailments and heart conditions and diabetes and different things. So that makes it very easy, in my opinion, for them to remember that every day as a way to make a better choice for themselves.
Kathy, for somebody that wants to make this a part of their life, in other words, they don't just want to try this out for a week and then give it up. They really want to make this a part of their life. What advice would you offer them so that they would have that ability to stay with it?
If you're going to make a big change in your life, you really have to feel it inside and know that this is really something you want to try to do. And you can dabble and go back and forth, and some people have to do that as part of their nature of making changes. And I tend to be quicker about those things. My wife, she takes forever. Oh my God, it's just unbelievable to me. Like I'm going to do X, and maybe I'll gear up for a week, and she has to gear up to something for 6 months. She has to think about it and do it differently, and it makes me crazy. Uh, but it works for her. It really does. And if she tries to do it the way I do it, it never works for her. So it's important to think about that as well. How do you need to do this? What's going to work for you? And maybe even if it's a moral reason or a health reason, I think both are good things to really keep in your heart, and maybe even keep a journal about, to kind of remind you why you're making some of these different choices.
Now, you mentioned your wife. What's her name?
Cheryl Purser.
When you first got together with Cheryl, first of all, is she currently plant-based?
No.
Okay, great. So can you talk a bit about that as a couple? How is it that you balance that? Because I know a number of people struggle with that, and yet they don't necessarily have to struggle with that. So could you talk a bit about your relationship?
Sure, because there is a part of me, of course, that hopes that one day she'll stop eating meat. But I have to accept her for who she is and who she is now, and I'm not going to try again. If I try and make her do that, however, I do most of the cooking. So she probably eats plant-based on a good week, 75%, on a bad week, 50%, which is, for a meat eater is still pretty big numbers, because she doesn't like to cook. And I actually became a vegetarian when I first started cooking meat. So I cooked meat like 2 times, saw the side of beef, and then I was done, because it just doesn't seem like stuff you should put in your mouth to me. So she has her own pans and her own cutting boards and things like that, so I don't have to deal with any of that. But honestly, she'll get in a kick, and maybe she'll make something for like a week or two, twice a year. So we really don't keep meat here. She does do dairy, and so we do have dairy in the fridge, but that doesn't bother me as much as the meat does, because I think some of it too is just meat safety, just really, it just kind of grosses me out, just as a person. So with that, she eats meat most of the time when she goes out. And often when she goes out, she'll still split things with me or get vegetarian, because she's often drawn to it. when we first met and started going out, she wouldn't eat broccoli. She would eat no vegetables. She would have peas, corn, and carrots. That was the only vegetables she would eat.
Wow, I'm sure you have opened up her world to an incredible amount of amazing vegetables at this point.
I have, and what's kind of funny is I've actually done some writing for mom blogs because Cheryl's such a picky eater that all the tricks I use on her, moms can use on their kids. Because I always say she eats like an 8-year-old, and she loves chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese, and she could care less if they're vegan or not.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your professional work. And one of the things that you write a lot about is healthy, slow cooking. So could you just first of all describe what that term means, healthy, slow cooking?
When I first started the blog, I wanted to write a slow cooker book that would be good for someone transitioning. It's sometimes easier if you're young and you just decide you're going to be vegan or you're going to be, give up meat. I think sometimes it's harder if it's someone's grandfather who's been told by their doctor that they're going to have surgery if they don't cut out the meat and the dairy. And so I wanted to have something that was healthier options of some of the things that they would have eaten. And that's how I started the blog. And that's The Vegan Slow Cooker was my first book. And it has some plant-based stuff in it, but it definitely has a lot of transitional foods. And by transitional foods, I mean what people call fake meat, which to me, tofu, tempeh, and seitan are their own thing, and they're not fake meat. But some people get angry about the fake meat. And I don't really understand that because no one's making you eat it or buy it. And I think it's important to be there for these transitional things. And actually, in all of my cookbooks, I have a recipe for sausage. It's all different. Like in the Vegan Slow Cooker, I made an apple sage sausage that ends up being kind of like Give Me Lean, and it makes an awesome sausage gravy. But, in the Great Vegan Bean book, I made a bean-based sausage. In the Outrageous Oatmeal, I made a steel-cut, oat-based sausage crumble for pizzas. And so I think those are really kind of important. And obviously, everything isn't for everybody, but still, like in the soups for the Vegan Slow Cooker, there's like a delicata squash and pear soup. That's for everybody. There's no oil in it. There's a little bit of wine. You can totally leave that out. I like for my recipes to be very easy to kind of customize to whatever your own beliefs are. Obviously, if you're eating halal, you don't eat any kind of alcohol, so that could be left out. If you don't eat oil, there's all kinds of ways to really substitute that out. And when I have testers for my cookbooks, I usually have people testing it all different kinds of ways so that I know it will work that way when it gets to you.
I'm really glad that Kathy brought up this point. It's not necessary when following a plant-based recipe to always have it exact. I think a lot of times people get caught up in trying to do it perfectly. But this isn't baking, where you often need the right balance of ingredients so that something could rise. It's more about making plant-based meals that excite you, that really energize and bring life to this incredible being that you are. Well, you actually mentioned some of your books that I'd like to talk a little bit about, and, the books on beans and oatmeal. So let's first maybe talk about beans. And I know that a lot of people, when they think of beans, they have that image of a can of baked beans. So if I were new to eating plant-based and I had that one image in my mind, especially if that image didn't excite me, what would you say to pique my interest in beans?
Well, I was not a bean eater growing up. So I understand. I don't know where I got that aversion, but when I became vegetarian, then I started eating more beans. And then I was like, hey, these are pretty awesome. Beans don't have to be boring. I think people think, oh, When I'm in college or when I'm poor, I'll eat beans and rice. They truly are thinking of beans cooked the way they are with a pinch of salt and some plain rice. And what you have to really think about, and becoming vegetarian really opened up like international food for me. Indian food is based on beans and grains. Mexican food is based on beans and grains. There's so many different ways to go with it, and every culture has some kind of beans involved. Spices and how you cook the beans are a big deal. Being from the South, basically my mom always used fatback, which is just a really disgusting thing. But it added a smoky flavor. Well, I have 4 kinds of liquid smoke at my house, and I have 2 kinds of smoked salts. So you can still have that smoky, deep flavor without using any animal products at all. And once you start adding some of that into your soups with beans or your refried beans, it really kind of makes it a bigger world.
Do you have a recipe that you could share that involves beans?
One of the recipes I really like, I make a sloppy buffalo beans, and it's just kidney beans, basically, in a buffalo sauce with some tomato paste and liquid smoke, and you could put some cashew cream on there and chop up some celery and carrots and serve it open-faced or on a bun. And I mean, that really elevates what could just be a can of kidney beans. And you could also make the kidney beans from scratch, which is a really good reason to have like a slow cooker or an instant pot, is that then that also becomes so much cheaper, because sometimes a pound of beans can cost less than half of a can of beans, and it makes about 3 or 4 cans of beans.
One of the things that I really like about beans is that there's a very satisfying feeling to it. They're very filling. And of course, oatmeal has that tendency as well. It can be a very filling quality to it. And you've written a book also on oatmeal. So could you tell us a little bit about that one as well?
With the bean book and the oatmeal book, then it becomes clear my obsessive nature, I think. So with oatmeal, I had already had like 50 different flavors of slow cooker oatmeal on my blog. So I was like, it's time to start thinking savory. Oat is really an amazing thing. When you just think about it, you probably think of instant oats you had as a kid, or maybe rolled oats, and that one fancy hotel you had steel cut oats at, I think is the general experience. But when you start thinking of oat is a grain, just like rice or millet or anything else, and you start thinking larger, because steel cut oats are great because they really hold up their shape, and they're great in a savory risotto to use instead of rice. And it is very filling, especially oats over some of the other grains. It does have like a little bit of fat content. And so that gives it kind of that mouthfeel. It makes it a little more filling. It takes a little longer to digest. If you're looking at steel cut oats or oat groats, and oat groats are actually the whole oat with just the husk, which is inedible, removed. And steel cut oats then are those oat groats cut in 2 or 3 pieces. And rolled oats have been steamed. It's kind of like an oat groat that's been steamed and rolled over. So they all have the same wonderful nutritional value, but they can all be used a little bit differently. And you can even make the most convenient and cheapest non-dairy milk possible with oats.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about, as you're traveling around, or maybe even in your own community, do you have a favorite vegan restaurant or restaurant that offers you some great plant-based meals?
Absolutely. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and there's some great options around. We have the Vegan Bull City Challenge every year, and so they actually get regular restaurants to add vegan options for a month, and they'll have like a little contract with them. So there's always a lot of buzz around October. But anytime if you're coming into the Triangle area in Raleigh, North Carolina, there's a restaurant called Fiction Kitchen, and it's run by Carolyn Morrison and her wife, and it's amazing. It is a vegetarian restaurant, but probably 80 to 90% of what she does is vegan. Most of the time, the vegetarian option is that you could have goat cheese instead of cashew cheese. So, I mean, it's really wide open, and she has everything from vegan chicken and waffles to these wonderful, innovative farmer plates where she goes to the farmer's market and just finds what's fresh and makes some amazing things. Like sometimes it could be Indian based, it could be anything, and I've never had one that wasn't just dazzling. In Asheville, North Carolina, there's a vegan restaurant called Plant, which is also worth coming to Asheville just to go to. It's pretty amazing as well, and Asheville is an awesome spot for vegan food.
Well, you've been doing this for so long now and really going back to the 1980s and talking about the underground kind of places where you would go to find out about tofu and things like that. And I've noticed in the last year or so, it just seems like things are exponentially growing even faster. And I'm wondering if you see anything kind of coming up in the future that really feels exciting about the plant-based world, about the vegan world, that really kind of has your interest peaked, so to speak.
Well, everything kind of piques my interest, but there seems to be more veg fests coming up in smaller cities, and I think that's very exciting because that kind of gets the message out a little bit more. One thing I'm noticing as a vegan blogger is that the Facebook groups, vegan Facebook groups and plant-based Facebook groups are growing huge. And one of those, actually my new book uses the Instant Pot, which is a multi-cooker. And so it has pressure cooker, slow cooker, rice cooker, yogurt maker, everything but do your laundry, pretty much. And I had gotten that after I finished the Easy Vegan Cookbook because I just wanted to play. And so I got onto this group, and there are a couple of amazing plant-based groups that are tens of thousands of people large. And it's an active group, and I went in and I just said hey, and then everyone was like, I have your bean book, and that was very exciting. But if you ask a question in that group, 10 people will answer you, and it's just it makes my heart feel happy that again, that there's a community where people are helping each other figure these things out. And I think that that's happening more.
Yeah, it really does feel like there's this support that's out there now that wasn't there back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, we just didn't have those resources that are available now where somebody can just share a simple recipe with you that can sometimes make that kind of difference.
Yes, and because there is just a huge amount of vegan recipe blogs too, and I'm friends with a lot of vegan authors of cookbooks and blogs, and I think that all the people I know are really going out of their way to try and make things super accessible for people who either feel like they don't know how to cook yet or really don't know how, or really just starting out. And I think that the resources are so much greater obviously than when in the 80s you couldn't go on the internet and find a recipe. You had to go to someplace and buy a book. So I remember collecting vegan cookbooks, and I think I had 5 at one point, because that was all I could get to from the bookstores. And now, there's 5 vegan slow cooker cookbooks.
Yeah. And your new book, when do you hope that will be out?
That comes out in January, but you can pre-order it now, like on Amazon or at your local bookstore.
You are well known for the slow cooking, but you also have been getting into the Instant Pot. So could you talk a little bit about that?
I'm really enjoying cooking with the Instant Pot, and that's kind of fun. And it seems like that's a big trend going on in the vegan community right now. So if it's something that if you have $100 in your budget that you can splurge on something, I would definitely go on Facebook, look for some of these groups and see if it's of an interest to you, because One of the reasons I started with slow cooking is because it really makes cooking accessible to people who can't be at home all day or can't stand in front of the stove for 2 hours every night. And I wanted to make it quick and easy. And I find that the Instant Pot is also quick and easy in a different way. Like the slow cooker, you can basically prep your food the night before, throw it in the morning, go to work, come home, and have a meal. And with the Instant Pot, you can actually, it cooks things so much faster because of the pressure cooking element of it, that you can come home and just kind of have a meal still without standing in front of the stove for hours. And I'm queen of, I want to put it in and go away and read and have a glass of wine. My friend Jill Newsonow, who also does pressure cooker stuff, she is queen of it needs to be done faster. So she wants to be able to get in there and eat and do it because I was like, did you know about this setting? There's this great setting. It's one of the grain ones, and it actually soaks in warm water for 30 minutes and then it cooks it for 45. So it's perfect for things like oat groats, wheat berries, things that just take a really long time to cook. And you could also cook those overnight in your slow cooker. But I love that because I'm the worst at soaking grains. So like you can cook oat groats and wheat berries much faster if you soak them overnight. But probably 50% of the time I soak something, I don't remember until it smells funny days later. And there's nothing sadder than throwing away like sorghum that you went out to source.
Yeah.
So, and Jill thinks that's the worst setting ever because she would never want to, she's like, I would want to eat dinner in 15 minutes. And you're talking about something that takes over an hour. And so there's different ways, that people think about it, but you can use things like the slow cooker and the Instant Pot really to suit your cooking and eating style.
You probably recall, I think it was a couple of months ago now, that Amazon offered that special deal with the Instant Pot that they had like $40 or $50 off. And I believe the numbers that I saw, they sold over 225,000 of them in one day. So the interest is definitely there.
Right. Well, the Instant Pot community Facebook group, which is just the general community, has over 100,000 people.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And I mean, when you think about it, Facebook communities, it's not everybody in the world who has an Instant Pot. They're not even in these groups. So it's just fascinating.
You've shared a lot of information here today. If the listeners would like to stay in touch with you and keep informed on what you're doing, what's the best way that they can do that?
They can go to my blog, healthyslowcooking.com, and there they can either follow me on any of the social media, or they can sign up for my newsletter and choose to get something every time a recipe publishes or once a week. And that they would probably know everything that's going on. I try to put up at least one recipe a week. And lately I've been doing vegan meal plans. So I've been planning out 7 days worth of meals, and that way people could also use that too. They'll get that in their email.
Excellent. Well, I thank you very much for sharing all this information and for allowing us to learn more from you. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the invitation.
As the interview with Kathy Hester comes to a close, what's the one thing that you'll take away from the conversation today? Instead of just passively listening, which can be fun at times, right? Just to kind of chill and relax, but to actually think about what's one thing that you can do that will deepen your connection to eating plant-based. You see, as you explore this and bring it into your life, it opens up a whole new world for you, a new way of eating, a new way of being, and a new way of enjoying your life. Go enjoy some great plant-based food.